welcome to Weekends with Whitney. Coming up in today's show, Baton Rouge native Sister Helen Prejean. How her fight for human rights has circled the globe and changed policy and perceptions.
It's shifting, it's changing. The people are not rabid about the death penalty as much. And so we can see the shift beginning to happen. And it's a spirit thing that happens first. And then we can see the change that I do believe will come one day.
She shares her wisdom on how to live through pain and even thrive in darkness. Plus, Dr. Nick on the unfair labels we tag to every generation, why we shouldn't generalize anyone. But first, Sister Helen Prejean, how she's giving others the power to find their voice against injustice.
Hear my cry, please hear my call. You hold my hand, dear Lord, lest I fall. Take my hand, oh precious Lord, lead me on.
Sister Helen Prejean is best known for her tireless, articulate fight against the death penalty.
And when I'm by myself in the darkness.
Fewer know the other inequities she's fighting, like sexism.
Women still don't receive wages that are equal to men, though they do the same work.
She joined millions around the world in last year's Women's March.
When one thing is raised up, it all is. So the women speaking out, like refusing to be intimidated and silenced, now speaking out, and I think we can see a difference beginning.
She fights for the marginalized and disenfranchised, and warns Washington is helping the rich get richer.
You got to educate people on how the tax system works. Got to educate people on how stockholders and people that have investments are always going to be richer than people that do real work, because the investment rate is greater, and that's done by design in Congress. So now you have people who never have to work, they just do investments and they make much more money, and they will keep on making more money than people doing actual work on the ground. You got to educate people about that so they understand how the thing works.
She recently returned to her alma mater, St. Joseph's Academy. She challenged students to raise their voice to create a better, more just world.
Whether that's working with children, whether it's working with old people in retirement homes, whether it's working with social work, whether it's working on to get a just economy and budget in this country, whether it's working in the computer field to have social media in a way that truth gets out and you don't have all this fake stuff going on. Whatever field you're going to be in to help the kingdom of God to come.
That's where, she said, they'll find real joy.
Joy happens in our hearts when we're doing the right thing, no matter how hard we're working. It comes as a gift that God's presence has been there with us. And action. We are women of action. When we see something, we raise our voice. We join with others in the quest for justice.
Sister grew up privileged in Baton Rouge, her father an attorney. She learned about the underprivileged when she moved into the St. Thomas House housing projects in New Orleans.
African American people became my teachers, and I learned the other America. I learned the other set of rules when your daddy's not a successful lawyer, when you don't have resources, and what happens. And I learned courage from people, and I learned they befriended me and they taught me. And it's while I was there that one day, coming out of the Adult Learning Center, that somebody from the Prison Coalition office saw me and said, "Hey, Sister Helen, you want to be a pen pal, somebody on death row?" I said, yeah, sure, I could do that.
That decision would change the rest of her life.
I know in the street languages, capital punishment means them without the capital get the punishment. Only poor people in this country are selected for death.
She became a spiritual advisor for the death row inmate she first wrote to and was witness to his execution.
Dead man walking!
They strapped him in a wooden chair and pumped electricity through his body until he was dead. His killing was a legal act because he had killed. No religious leaders protested the killing that night, but I was there. I saw it with my own eyes. And what I saw set my soul on fire, a fire that burns in me now. When I came out of the execution chamber that night, it was in the middle of the night, it was dark, I'd never watched anybody be killed in front of my eyes. And I threw up, I vomited. And then I remember thinking, and it has stayed with me, when God calls us, and it is deep in us, it's gonna stay. And it happened right outside the gates of Angola, right in the dark, where I remember thinking the people are never gonna get close to see this because it's like a secret ritual executions. You'll never see it.
So Sister lifted her voice and began her lifelong crusade to execute justice, not lives.
Every voice and sing earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the lids.
It was the 1980s, and 80% of Americans supported the death penalty. Sister got little support in the church, too.
At first, our Catholic bishops in Louisiana, they were not strong in standing up whenever there was legislation to end the death penalty. They were not present. In fact, you know, we couldn't get a statement from our bishops to stand in solidarity and support to oppose the death penalty. It's been a journey for the whole church.
It's complicated. Sister empathized with victims' families, but felt an eye for an eye wasn't the answer.
I think of it like the cross of Jesus. On one is Jesus and God in compassion around a victim's family, innocent people being made to suffer. But where are God's arms with regard to the criminal? Where is the gospel of Jesus about the government saying, so we can execute them because of what they did to their victim, an eye for an eye? Where's Jesus in that? And where are we in that?
She protested the death penalty and started talking.
I realized, you know, that I have to bring people close. So I'm from Louisiana, so naturally, what's the first thing you think? Talk. And I thought, oh, writing a book, that's so passive, you know, a book.
Right.
You know, talk. And so I would go and give these talks. And then gradually I did begin to write. And then I went, I need to do a book. And you know what I found? The power of a book is when you open a book, you're quiet, you're using your imagination. You don't have to debate. And so it's a very receptive way to really take in an experience you otherwise would never have. Somebody's going to take you into a death chamber, or going to take you into both sides of this issue.
Sister's book, Dead Men Walking, caught fire. It spent 31 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, and it caught the attention of Hollywood actress Susan Sarandon.
I was doing The Client when I got a hold of the book, and I contacted her and we decided to meet, and she just gave me the book on a handshake, and I said I would try my best to figure out the best way to do it.
She's the passion behind the movie because she knew she had to get Tim Robbins. For 9 months, she pestered him. Did you read the nun's book? He probably did it for domestic tranquility. Yeah, okay, I read the nun's book, you know.
I started getting impatient. Months passed, and a year. And then I had kind of a little mini breakdown and said, you know, if you're not going to do this, I'm going to give it to somebody else. And, you know, I'm turning down all these parts, and I really feel like this story needs to be told now. There's just something that I feel has to be told now. And so then he read the book and started to get into his imagination.
And he wrote the screenplay, and this movie came out. I mean, what were the chances?
Everything fell into place at lightning speed, as if it had wings.
And I felt good, Whitney, when Tim Robbins said for the movie it was the easiest screenplay he ever wrote, because I had taken you over to both sides of the issues, over to the victim's family, over to the, and that made me feel good.
Sister Helen was a consultant for the movie and even appeared in one of the scenes.
So while we were working on the movie, I said, well, Tim, how are we going to get people to come to our movie? Because I was very collaborative with him on every line, every scene. He said, well, we hoping for some Academy Award nomination.
Oh!
So I said, well, Tim, that's a long shot, huh? He goes, Helen, the whole movie is a long shot. Everything's a long shot.
That long shot racked up 4 Academy Award nominations.
So 4 times, and there were 1.3 billion people watching the Academy Awards in 1996. And they heard about the book.
Susan Sarandon won the Oscar for Best Actress in her portrayal of Sister Helen.
Look, I want the last thing you see in this world to be a face of love. So you look at me when they do this thing. You look at me.
And the Oscar goes to Susan Sarandon in Dead Man Walking.
And Sister was the first person she thanked.
First of all, Sister Helen Prejean, who's here tonight, for trusting us with your life and bringing your light and your love into all of our lives.
Immediately, Dead Man Walking became a household phrase.
It just went right into a New Yorker cartoon. These 2 wives sitting on the, the wife sitting on the couch with a friend. Here's her husband coming in for morning coffee, like, she goes, dead man walking. And then they show a team, baseball team not doing too well, coming out on the field, dead men walking. And it just kind of caught on, and it drove people to the book. On the screen, when you see Dead Man Walking, the last thing in big letters across the screen, Tim Robbins put, read the book, Dead Man Walking. There was a dynamic, see, because a film is visual and visceral and brings you there, and then reading is meditative and reflective. So if you can do, we called it our little 1-2 punch. We said the film plows the ground and the book tills the soil.
But that's not all. Dead Man Walking has been made into a stage play and an international opera. When it made its Washington, D.C. debut at the Kennedy Center, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg was at the dress rehearsal, opening night, the Q&A after, and then the late-night cast party. Sister Helen's been a featured speaker and panelist with the Dalai Lama, too. She's been on every major TV network and show. Her activism and articulation are changing attitudes. Those favoring the death penalty have dropped from 80 to under 50%. The number of executions are falling too.
Fewer and fewer and fewer states are actually executing people, and there are fewer and fewer death sentences. People are going to go for life, and juries are going for life. It's an instinct in us to go for life before we go for death.
Sister's efforts with Pope Francis recently came to fruition.
I got involved with his case, and I had a chance to have a direct dialogue with the Pope, and it was in a letter, and I raised that question of dignity, because And I said, look, I'm Catholic. We're pro-life across the board. We believe in the dignity of all life from womb to tomb. But I was meeting a lot of Catholics who were against abortion, but they were for the death penalty. And so I said to the Holy Father, and I didn't talk to him any different than I'm talking to you. If you ever get a chance to talk to the Pope, you talk to the Pope like we talk to each other, right? You don't have any special Pope language that you use. On August 2nd, for the first time, Pope Francis declared that the death penalty is wrong in every instance. It can never, ever be applied by governments, even for people who are guilty of terrible crimes. And why? Because it's against the inviolable dignity of human life.
Sister Helen's still working on abolishing the death penalty in Louisiana, but it's a hard fight. However, she's hopeful that day will come.
So we are a life state. The death penalty really doesn't fit us.
She urges everyone, whatever issue they're passionate about, to raise their voice and be counted.
It comes down to voting, being participants in our democracy. And to get the vote out, you got to do that.
Precious Lord, lead me on.
Sister Helen has another book coming out in just the next few months. It's a memoir entitled River of Fire. And still ahead, Dr. Nick on the unfair labels we cast on different generations and the research that proves doing so is all wrong, as Weekends with Whitney continues. Often we put generations into boxes, the millennials, the Generation Xers, the baby boomers, and we give them unfair labels, especially when you look at some research recently. Dr. Nick joins us with more. Good to see you. What would you be called? Would you be a boomer?
I'm a boomer.
Okay. I don't know what I am.
I'm a boomer. I was born in 54.
Okay.
Born in 54. But again, I don't know what that stereotype is. I just know that when we talk about millennials, we really have gotten very good or bad, however you perceive it, as categorizing, as labeling.
Yes.
Entitled, you know, spoiled.
Very self-absorbed.
Self-absorbed.
And tell me about the research that you came across that says we are wrong about them.
Whitney, I know I can be over-dramatic, but they researched 600,000 people.
Yeah, over 8 years.
Over an 8-year period.
Which is impressive.
And the conclusion is that what 2 out of 100 maybe would fit the stereotype. They found that most of the differences were intergenerational, meaning that millennials were very different from each other. It wasn't millennial versus baby boomer.
All right.
As different. You with me?
I am.
It was inter. And what he was saying in his article, which just fascinated me, is that we spend entirely too much time categorizing and labeling and saying, and therefore expecting certain behaviors.
Because 98% of the Xers or the millennials they're different.
They're different. They're different. And you know,
so yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, because you were laughing earlier when we were kind of chatting about this before segment, and I was saying, well, yeah, they say that the millennials like flexibility, and you said, who
doesn't like flexibility? They like flexible work schedules. Who doesn't like that?
What about they want to start a job at 40, 45, 50,000? You said, who wouldn't?
Who doesn't want to start a job at that?
It was. I think the real fascination with it was that, and we really didn't talk about this. I think we have to live with categories.
Oh, you do?
Yes, I do. And then once we frame the category, we kind of throw it out the window. But there's something about us that tends to need to group people to make life less complicated.
Interesting.
It is interesting. But when you think about it, it does make sense. We do need to group people. That doesn't mean to discriminate. It doesn't mean to prejudice. Look what we do with Myers-Briggs. Oh, you're an extrovert, or you're an introvert.
Yeah.
Or you're you know, intuitive.
You're a BC, you're an AD.
And it's like, or type A personality.
Yeah.
Don't you see, there's a tendency,
There is.
we need to do it. But once we do it, we need to throw it out the window. And that's what I thought was so great about this research, that ultimately we look at each person's individual talents, skills, needs, goals, attitudes, and he was saying that they're all different.
Well, we were using my son as an example, who's 20, and my niece Lily, she's 20. So you and Reed would have just as much in common personality-wise, if not more so, than Reed and Lily, which is what this study said.
That's what he's saying. Could be.
Sure.
And maybe not. But the point is that we don't need to set up necessarily, I just know what I'm going to get when I'm around Reed.
Right.
You know, I was telling you when we were at the funeral that of your mother-in-law that Reed walked up to me and gave me a big hug and said, "Hello, Mr. Nicky." Well, you know, Whitney, immediately I thought, well, that's kind of neat for a millennial. Do you hear how we do it? Do you hear how we do it? I had a waiter not long ago, 20 years old. Fascinating. Works hard. Asked him about the menu, and he said, well, you know, honestly, I've only been doing this for a couple of days. And I thought, that's great.
He's honest.
A baby boomer would have said, well, you know, you need to get this.
The most expensive thing on the menu.
Which is unfair to the baby boomer. But I'm just saying that it's really kind of taking the person for the person and not the age.
Right, right. Is there a difference between categorizing people and labeling people?
Well, if I were gonna answer that personally, I would say the labeling sounds pejorative. It sounds negative.
Yes.
Categorizing, it doesn't sound that way to me. It's like we have to live with categories. I've got files in my office.
Sure.
Huh?
Well, I think it speaks to what your experience with Reed at the funeral, which is that, you know, you had him in a category. He's a millennial, but then all of a sudden, when he came up to you first, I'm so glad to see you. You were like, well, that's unusual for a millennial. Because you had labeled him.
I had labeled him. And then the more we got to talking, I was realizing, wow, he's really got his own experiences. He was correcting me on some of the things I thought about Colorado and about where he goes to school and about, you know, what they do socially. We'll leave it at that. You know, but I just was so struck. And I really would love for the audience to, let's just be careful about this is what I should get from this age group, or this age group, or that age group. And I'm a baby boomer, and I'm ready to go to the beach and work in a bar.
Right. Probably not the typical boomer, but that's just because we're our own thing.
Right.
And I'll have to say about the millennials, because I think a lot of times when they have summer jobs or people encounter with them as they graduate, go into the workforce, that even employers or coworkers have a mindset on who they're going to be, right? They're going to, as you said, maybe they're going to be self-absorbed. It's all about me, unrealistic expectations on income and all those type of things. And it's not fair to them.
It's not fair. It's not fair. And when you think about it, it's not really fair to the employer, because he may be missing something that they bring in gold.
Yes.
And they don't see it.
Because they're not looking for it.
Because they're not looking for it. Because they're not expecting, you know, him or her to have. And plus, Whitney, I just think that the value, again, of every age, it's just, have just so, like a 90-year-old has much to offer.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, a 100-year, every age, a 12, 13-year-old, they see the world a certain way. Yes. You know, and so you want to respect their vision of the world. The only thing that I thought he was missing out on, and I know it's stereotypical, was the social media aspect. But then you were saying, well, everybody's caught up in it now.
Yeah,
we can't just blame them.
Right, right. Now they spent more of their lives doing it, but you know, certainly we all are there.
But this is real quick. Well, I was saying, you know, I was out to lunch, and the waiter was 20 years old and was very honest and really professional, working hard. My brother was with me. This is where I think I could be fair without being unfair. Joseph said, I can't get my Wi-Fi to work. Guy picked up the phone, blah, 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 had it done.
They are great for that.
I'm sorry, I know that sounds like a label, but I would turn to a 20-year-old when it comes to a computer issue.
Know where the experts lie. Always.
But again, I don't know that I don't think he's saying that that's a bad thing. I do. Again, I think there's some things we can generalize on it. They are more computer savvy.
They've done it.
But that's a positive.
I think so too. When mine's not working, it's a real positive.
But the real thing is to be careful with labels. Yeah, that's a good insight. Categories are fine. Labels can be so degenerative, unfair, negative, missing.
Yeah.
We missed the real person.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dr. Nick. More Weekends with Whitney after this. Atlas Foundation Repair, fixing your foundation problems for more than 30 years while preserving and protecting your trees. Thanks for sharing your time with us here on Weekends with Whitney. We hope to see you back here again next week. Until then, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And until then, we leave you with this.